Hello and welcome to the Engerati studio here at European Utility Week. We're joined now by Thomas from Bloomberg. And firstly, welcome. Thanks for making the time. I know it's a busy schedule for you guys, especially with what you do. But just to put the rest of what we're going to talk about into context, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the innovation hubs and the innovation zone and all of that conversation that was going on at European Utility Week this year?
Sure. I mean, on a very simple level, I moderated a panel and gave a presentation yesterday, but what I was saying actually in the presentation was what we're planning to do after. So beforehand, I was speaking with the organizers and involved in developing a little bit of an initiative where we're trying to look at innovation in terms of future scenarios for the energy sector. And thinking about the future is actually quite an involved process. You've got to brainstorm all sorts of different ideas. And so what we are trying to do is actually use this as a starting point for an ongoing scenario exercise where we're going to be circulating materials afterwards based on the discussions we had here to create a framework for thinking about the future, for thinking about some of the uncertainties, some of the possible ways the energy sector might evolve and where the opportunities for innovation are. And so over the course of the year, we should be able to update that picture and sort of engage the community around the utility sector in Europe to get some of their knowledge, because, you know, obviously I could go back to the office and have a brainstorm with some of my colleagues and that's fantastic, but it's better to engage the broader community and to get all of their experiences together. And so that's what we're trying to launch. It's sort of this, what we've done in the Innovation Hub it's a starting point for something.
Right, it's a jump off.
It's a jump-off point, exactly.
Okay. And people will be able to find that and follow that online, I would imagine.
We've yet to, because it's a lot of unknowns. We're not sure exactly how the sessions would go today and yesterday, and exactly how clear some of the messages would be. We're still working on exactly what the first point of follow-up. There'll definitely be some materials circulated. We may also be having a webinar, bringing back some of the speakers to further reflect on some of the things discussed. These are, these things are in discussion right now.
Okay, so let's focus on the root of the talk about it. This sector. I was meeting with someone from ESB, and he said, you know what, the energy sector has been boring for 80 years. Yeah. It suddenly got exciting. It suddenly got interesting, which is why we're talking about innovation in a positive sense, I think. So can you paint a picture about where you guys see the innovation? Where does the innovation need to happen? I mean, the energy sector is quite complex. You know, we can't innovate everything at the same time.
I mean, I think it would be wrong to say that there's not been any innovation in the energy sector. It's just that it's been the same kind of innovation.
It's been engineering-led innovation.
Exactly. Whereas now, I mean, I think the thing that's really changing with distributed generation, with cheaper and cheaper renewable technologies, and also the opportunities made available by digital technology, suddenly there's this sort of new type of innovation, which is innovation around the consumer. And that's different because energy, being an electricity utility or even a gas utility, used to center around, it was a very well-defined problem. Your end users are expected to get what they get in terms of kilowatt hours of energy when they need it. That problem is defined for you. You don't have to worry about anything else. Now there's all sorts of new possibilities. There's the possibility of new entrants, leveraging opportunities like the connected home that could pose a threat to utilities, but that's also an opportunity for utilities to move into new services. Suddenly they have to understand these people that are consuming energy, and in a way that's one of the big challenges. If you've been constantly thinking about engineering problems for 80 years and then all of a sudden you have to think about people problems and product innovation, that's really where the challenge lies.
So when you paint a picture like that, there are kind of two issues that need to be addressed. One is an internal issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you need that culture change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where do you feel the industry is on that? I mean, because you can't innovate if you haven't then got the internal, otherwise you end up with what I call institutional inertia. You might want to innovate, and you get pockets of bright people, and
Yeah.
someone hires someone and say, hey, you did this, go ahead and do this, but they hit inertia.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was moderating a panel yesterday, and we had a polling question, and it was, what is the biggest threat that utilities face? And there's all these things, flat demand, distributed generation, all these options. The one that came out on top was the lack of culture of innovation within utilities. And this is a utility audience saying our problem is that we lack innovation. You think, well, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the kid in the playground who gets picked on because he's not cool, and he knows that his problem is that he's not cool, but that doesn't mean that he can just become cool overnight.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that with the utilities. They know that they're not innovative. They know that that's not naturally part of the culture. Or sorry, they're not innovative when it comes to people. And I think that the challenge is getting the right people in the door. And it's not just about saying you need to do that, it's what can utilities do to attract talented people who are interested in these things, because it's not traditionally been a sexy industry for bright young things. I think it's also an issue that the industry is so male dominated when 50% of consumers are women. And actually, if you're looking at households, a lot of the decisions actually reside with females rather than men.
So there's an empathy issue.
Yeah, the panel I moderated yesterday was one of the innovation heads actually at one of Europe's biggest utilities. She was telling this anecdote, and I thought it was really interesting. It illustrates the problem perfectly. As she was sitting down with a bunch of engineers, they were talking about how they had adapted a washing machine and they could make it respond to utility price signals. So if electricity got more expensive, it could automatically switch off, save you money. And I was thinking, wow, that's fantastic, Yeah,
but that's no good if your kids just come in with a mucky shirt. Right?
Exactly. She said, clearly, and she said she was the only woman in the room, and she said to them, clearly none of you have ever been a mother, and where you're really just trying to get through the day in one piece. And the last thing you need is your washing machine to switch off because it's going to save you 10 euro cents, and even if you say that adds up over the course of the year. And I think that's just a clear example where in order to innovate, you also need a certain amount of diversity that's lacking at the moment in the industry. But I think it's important to also recognize that these problems have been identified and they're being worked on, which is by a lot of the utilities involved. So it's not like there's nothing being done. And some of the sort of segmentation we're seeing of divisions is directly in response to that, to try and separate out engineering problems and sort of product development problems. So that's something that is changing, but it has to change. And whether it can change fast enough is one of the questions.
And it's also one of those interesting things that, up until now, the need for product development hasn't been there because what
your product was kilowatt hours of electricity.
Exactly, it's an electron. It lives and it dies in a millisecond. So, one of the other interesting things, taking a bit of an observation as well, when I've been monitoring the market is, one of the things that when I came from the IT space, we used to look at the WPP brand index to see who's doing well and so on. And there was never any utility on there.
Yeah.
Up until this year, and it was Ovo Energy.
Oh, right.
One of the newest utilities. It was the first time in the WPP brand index. That says a lot, doesn't it, about where this market is in terms of engaging with. One of the indicators of consumer engagement is brand.
Right, and that's something that I think it's interesting that Ovo Energy is there. I would say it's interesting to know how the incumbents feel about that. On the one hand, they could say it's bad because there's this new kid on the block and he's got a great brand and our brands are terrible. Or they could say, actually, this is interesting for us because people are now beginning to see energy differently. And the question is whether we can respond with our own branding and our own strategies, our own partnerships, in order to also benefit from that sort of the wind of change that's blowing there. It could be interpreted more than one way.
Okay. So let's rewind a little bit. We've got a few more minutes left, and let's talk about innovation. Let's blue sky a little bit. You're in this market from an analytical point of view, so you've probably got a bigger breadth of stuff you need to take in. Where are you seeing the innovation? Where are you seeing things being sort of busted and bruised a little bit in terms of the market? Is it from the incumbents, or is it from the new entrants? You know, some of the cool things like with Google Maps in the US now, you can have a solar index of your roof right away and then immediately call a supplier. I mean, that's just very innovative companies coming in and going, we can play.
Right, it's interesting. I mean, for me, and I think when you talk to a lot of the incumbents about this, innovation is all about picking the right partnerships. Partially because of what we were saying about the culture of innovation. It's challenging to suddenly expect your company to come up with loads of new stuff. It's also because a lot of the innovations, for them to really do well, they have to be sort of top level engineering to make them work. I mean, if we take the example of thermostats, smart thermostats, I think the ones that are going to win the market are the ones that ultimately become invisible, not the ones where, it's all on your smartphone and you can control it completely. The ones that will win are the ones where you don't need to control it because it's so automated. But that's really I don't think there's a benefit from a utility going to that level of product development because it'll only ever serve their customers. However, a sort of a global technology company or even a technology startup that could work across all markets, it's worth it for them to do that. So I think that is where the point of innovation is in the utility sector, is it's really all about the partnerships. And for me, when I'm looking at the space as an analyst, every time the new partnership is announced, a little bell rings, and we try and make sense of what it means and what it's telling us about the way things are evolving.
The actors that I find are going to be quite interesting, and they aren't really making enough noise are the white good manufacturers,
Right.
Because when you add it all together, they're the biggest energy consumers in the home, aren't they?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, and it's something that I've been wondering about as well a little bit. I mean, we've seen, for example, in the US, Tesla has launched their battery product.
Yeah, the Powerwall. Yeah,
and some people say, well, this is for backup. But, you think, well, what are the things that you need to sort of not go off in the home? Well, one of them is your fridge and your freezer, right? And that's a thermal load, which means there's a possibility for integrating thermal storage into the design. I think that the reason that hasn't necessarily happened is because you'd have a more expensive fridge with less space and no one would want to buy it. And yet, if someone's willing to pay for a battery, which is overall, if you look at the system, even less economical, you say there's something that needs to be figured out here. And maybe it is that actually storage is a bit of a distraction right now and it's not ready for mass market. But I think that there is an awful lot of possibility for innovation in white goods, but I haven't yet seen it.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I'm wondering about as well.
Okay, good. Well, on that note, we're going to have to leave it because we come to the end of our time. But the very fact that we sped through that so quickly just shows the level of innovation that is not just happening, but could happen and will happen as all this stuff joins up even more. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you as well for watching.